We've been talking about kind of self-care and the fact that we're basically made up of three different parts as human beings, and we've already touched on the soul, which was last week's episode. And if you didn't see that, we'll be sure to put a link in the description of this one. But today we're going to talk about self-care for our bodies. I noticed like three kind of takeaways from that particular study. The first takeaway that I got was that shorter vacations can have a significant improvement on measures of perceived stress, your recovery, your strain, and your overall well-being. Second one is that there appears to be no difference between, like you said, vacationing outside of the home or staycationing, which you mentioned also has become more common during and post COVID pandemic, and that the beneficial effects can last for up to 45 days after taking some time off, whether it be a vacation or a staycation.
Absolutely. And you know what else I think, James? I think that telling jokes is actually really good. So you have a joke where I think we just need to stop right here. We were actually sitting here before we started recording this podcast, and James told me a joke that we almost lost it. So.
Yeah, we almost couldn't get the thing going.
So I'm going to let you tell that joke.
Okay, so I'm not taking credit for this. I did read it on social media, but it basically says that Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd broke into a distillery. And once they got in, Daffy turns to Elmer Fudd and said, "Is this whiskey?" And Elmer Fudd said, "Yes, but not as whiskey as robbing a bank." So
maybe it's the Gen X in me, but that's hilarious because I grew up with Looney Tunes.
So did I.
That's awesome. I love it. Okay, so seriously though.
Back to the subject of drive.
The word says that laughter works like good medicine.
Yes.
So we definitely all need some laughter, which is good medicine.
Yep.
So James, let's get back to the subject of drive. You know, you said something to me a few days ago when we were talking about doing this podcast that I thought was really profound. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, absolutely. All I really said was we were talking about drive, and I said, being driven is almost like the difference between sheep and cattle, where sheep have to be led, but cattle have to be driven.
Yeah.
So are you a cattle or are you a sheep?
Yeah.
And
Jesus says that we're his sheep, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he says that we know his voice.
Wow, that is so good. And he's the good shepherd. That is amazing.
Yep.
And that kind of, I was talking to someone earlier and they were talking about all the things that have come up lately, kind of just been hit at once, right?
Oh, yeah.
And what I walked away from that conversation and I remember hearing, and I don't know who to give this credit to that said it, but they said for everything that you say yes to, there is something or things that you're going to have to say no to.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. Can't say yes to everything.
Right. But that really hit me because I thought, are we saying yes to the right things?
That's the question.
Yeah. And so when you said that about the sheep and the difference, that really hit me because we know the sheep know the shepherd's voice, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's just a little sidebar there that, maybe we ask God. I mean, we are believers, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to say, hey, God, is this thing that you have for me right now? Is this not for me? And I know to some people, they think, well, am I supposed to ask that about everything? Well, if you're in a situation where your life is kind of over the top and that one more thing could just push you over, then maybe that is time to just stop and reboot the whole system.
I've heard it said that the hardest word for a Christian to say is no.
Yeah, which is the most powerful.
It is the most powerful. Yes.
It is the most powerful word that we can say is no. I actually, it was several years ago whenever I was finishing college and I was, just started in chaplaincy. I was part of a very busy CISM team and that was working with our first responders in our area. And I was sitting one morning and I was reading my Bible and I read this verse in Matthew 11:28, I believe it is. And it talks about, if I can get this to come up. And it talks about, this is Jesus, and he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, meek, and humble, lowly in heart, and I will give you rest." And when I read that, I thought, yes, that's what I need,
rest,
Jesus.
yes.
I need rest, because it actually says rest for your souls.
Yes.
And which is what we're talking about here.
Right.
Is rest for your souls, rest for your body. And as I read that, I remember stopping and I put my Bible down and I said, yes, this is what I need. I need rest. And so I thought, well, I need to finish reading it so I can figure out how to get that, right? And so as I continued reading it, it says, for my yoke is wholesome, useful, good, not harsh, not hard, sharp, or pressing, but comfortable, gracious, and pleasant. And my burden is light and easy to bear. And as I read that, I actually felt a little shocked because I thought, wait a second. And I remember saying to the Lord, I said, why would you give me a yoke? That's the thing that goes around the animal's neck.
Right. Like on oxen or something like
Yes.
that. Yes.
And I said, but why would you give me a burden?
Right.
And does it matter if it's light or not?
It's still,
that seems like a lot.
Yeah, you're still putting this thing over my head and on my shoulders.
Right. And I remember asking him this question, and it's almost like I heard him say, look it up. You know? And so I did. I started researching what the different words in that scripture meant. And as I did, when I looked it up, I learned, well, we don't know a lot in this culture in this day and time about oxen and about what that meant. But in their culture, when Jesus said this, they understood it.
Yes.
Right? They knew what it meant. So the oxen, actually, it's very different than it is now. Maybe in some cultures it's still the same. But what happens is the yoke is to go on the oxen's neck, right? And what it does is they pair two oxen that are equally of height, right? And usually equally in weight.
Yep.
And they put this yoke or this thing around their neck, and then there's this bar, right, that goes across and it hooks the other one. And we're actually going to put a picture up for this because I want people to be able to see it.
Yep.
And so what happens is they pull the load that's behind them, and the load behind them is actually called a burden. Yeah. And so the burden, the definition of the burden was, it says it's a load, and it's especially heavy one.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Or else you wouldn't have to have two beefy oxen.
Right, just one.
Oxens probably don't appreciate me calling them beefy, but they are.
That's right.
So it's so that they can equally pull this burden together, right? And so then I found something else, which we're going to put up, and I want to show you what God showed me. It's very, very powerful because it changed the way I read the scripture and the way that I saw my laboring for Jesus. Okay. Right. And so actually then what he showed me is that the next picture that we're going to show you is an older, wiser oxen.
Okay.
And what happens is whenever they're training the youngsters, the young oxen, the ones that are younger and less experienced, they team them with an older, wiser oxen who's been doing it for a while, right? He knows how to keep in rhythm and to get the job done, and he knows how to go out through the whole day and get done with his job before he runs out of energy.
Sounds like a mentorship.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, right?
And then you have on the other side of him, they would pair a young oxen that was in training, or a younger oxen that's not as strong.
Okay.
And they would pair him to this older, wiser oxen. And as you see it, there's going to be a slant. And as you see the slant there, you can tell in the picture where the older oxen is the only one carrying the weight.
He's pulling it all himself.
Yes. And so the younger oxen, the oxen that's in training, he is actually only learning to stay in step with the older oxen. Because if you let the younger oxen be in charge, he's going to run out all of his strength before the day is done, before the job is finished. Right. So the older oxen is teaching him to stay in step with me. This is how we do the job. We're slow and steady until the end of the day, until we can get everything done.
Okay.
So God began to show me that this is the way that our relationship is with him. That's actually what this scripture means. That's why he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
So he's here and we're here.
Yes.
Oh.
So he is actually, the burden is light, which is the load, because he's doing all the lifting.
He's doing all the lifting and pulling, yeah.
Yes, and the yoke is easy because we're not being pulled by it. We're only staying in. As long as we stay in step with him, we only merely know there's a presence of the yoke.
Wow, that is very profound.
It is very profound. And so as I read this, I realized that a lot of the things that I was personally stressing over and being driven by, ministry, work, school, all these things, a lot of these things were of my own making. They were of my own making.
Yeah.
And they were, though he maybe had called me to ministry or called me to do these things, the way that I was handling it was not staying in step with him. I was trying to run ahead. And guess what? Before the end of the day, like the little oxen, I'd run out all my strength.
So you're saying you were driven?
Oh, I was so driven.
Okay.
I have the driven badge that
So do I.
I do, and I know, and I'm going to tell you something. But this is what he showed me, and I thought it was so incredibly powerful.
That is.
Yeah.
It's very powerful.